trained their gaze as penetratingly and persistently on the nation's identity. 𝗵𝗵's documentaries Invisible City is screening at ArtScience Museum as part of our Imaging Paradise film program, presented from August on the occasion of Singapore's National Day. This evening, we have the distinct pleasure of speaking with her about Invisible City and her filmmaking journey. We're live streaming on Facebook and YouTube and would love to hear from you. So please do share your thoughts or questions for 𝗵𝗵 in the live chat through the conversation, and we will try to get to as many as we can in the second part of the conversation. I'm delighted to welcome 𝗵𝗵 to today's talkback. Hello, 𝗵𝗵. Thanks so much for making the time.
Muted. Oops. Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. It's really lovely having you with us this evening, 𝗵𝗵.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
I'd like to start first, 𝗵𝗵, by getting you to share more about Invisible City, and later your approach to this work. For people who may not have had the chance to see the film yet, would you tell us what Invisible City is about?
Sure. Invisible City is a documentary that was completed in 2007, and it's a feature documentary which is about the documenting instinct. What I mean by that is I was trying to find people who had the same compulsion as I did to document Singapore. So I met up with, so it's a documentary about why do people kind of find themselves doing what they do. So we met up with Chen Xian, who's an archaeologist documenting Sentosa, and also colonial cinematographers like Dr. Ivan Polonin, Singaporean photographer Marjorie Doggett. At the same time, it's also a documentary about the labors of remembering and the labors not to forget. So at the end of the day, it's about two sides of the same coin. How not to forget and how to remember. The Chinese title, if you can see the background behind me. Oops. Sorry.
备忘录.
It says 备忘录, which I think it really means 准备忘记的记录. Or also a record in case you forget. Which I think is perfect, encapsulates the film in three beautiful words. I think more than maybe the English title can do.
If we talk a little bit more about what inspired you to make Invisible City, how the film was conceived, maybe in more concrete terms, and where did the idea come from, can you share a little bit more about that as well?
Sure. This film was made after Singapore Gaga in 2005, which was a film about Singapore's soundscapes. And I just thought, I want to make a Singapore Gaga Part 2. What shall I do? let's focus on Singapore spaces. And as I was filming different Singapore spaces, I found that I was actually more attracted to the people in the spaces than the spaces themselves. I mean, the spaces that I had filmed latterly became In Time to Come, which was a film that was made 10 years later. But at that time, I remember very distinctly going to photograph an archaeological site and found myself chit-chatting, having a long chat with Lim Chen Xian, who's behind me, over there. Yeah. And he was the archaeologist. And I found his passion for documenting what he found in Sentosa really interesting. I think we felt very alike in that way. So I decided that, interesting. I feel that there is something there. And that's how the film was born. It moved halfway in the middle of the shoot into something totally different.
Right. When you were talking about people like 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗃𝗃, the documenters and the observers who are featured in this film, from photographers and film directors to archaeologists and journalists, can I ask what drew you to these individuals?
I wanted to connect with people who were like me. So I guess you could say I was trying to find community. So I didn't just approach people who were doing what I was doing, but I also approached people who were trying not to let what they had collected in the process be lost. So you would meet Han San-yuan, who was a former student activist, and he would be showing his precious stash of photographs of his student activism days. And you could also see Dr. Ivan Polonin with his footage in his basement. Even though he was not feeling too well, he was actively trying to annotate his footage because they would, be lost to the world after he passed on. So balancing the act of documenting was the act of fighting against time, fighting against forgetting. 准备忘记的记录.
Then how did you go about searching for and then deciding on which stories to put in? I'm sure you must have been talking to a lot of people. What was the process like?
I usually, when I start something, have a list of people I want to talk to. And then I would just go ahead and meet them and film interviews with them. And in the process of the editing, whittle down the footage to a manageable. So I probably have like 30 hours of footage reduced to 1 hour.
Right.
So a lot of decisions are made during the editing process rather than the shooting process.
Right. We will go more into the editing process a little bit later on, but I was also just wondering whether there was maybe a particular story that you really leaned into in the sort of research work for this film, or maybe a story that perhaps felt most personal to you.
I have to say that I really, really felt my heart went out to 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗃𝗏𝗃. She is the photographer of Characters of Light. In the 50s, she went around Singapore photographing colonial buildings that were going to be demolished. And just the idea of a woman, a housewife, looking after children, going on a walkabout around Singapore, trying to decide the light, which side of the building would be seen best in her photographs. And then now you see her in her 80s and she's kind of like, she cannot walk anymore. And she's reminiscing the days in which she produced those photographs of Singapore. Yeah. I almost feel there's an autobiographical element.
Right. And just going back to the question earlier about editing, when you mentioned that you had 30 hours of footage and then you had to cut them down into 1 hour for the film, was there a certain way that guided the way that you think about structuring or editing this work?
Sure. As I said, in the middle, the editing was initially about spaces in Singapore. Yeah, so the first few edits were really about going around different spaces. But as I kept showing the edit to my friends, they said it doesn't make sense to them. So this, it's a heart attack moment for a director and her editor.
What was the kind of feedback that you got, like when they said, "Oh, this doesn't quite make sense"?
We don't know what this film's about. So that was when we decided, we have to let go of our original idea of spaces. We have to focus on the theme that was hovering in my subconscious, which I had not articulated then, which was the theme of the documentary instinct.
Right.
Yeah, I know, like everyone in their family will have someone who's always trying, during family gatherings, who's always the person trying to get everyone together to pose And without fail, this person is always the same person. You know, what makes that person that person?
Right.
Right.
We have a question from 𝗔𝗶𝗍𝗂𝗂 TV who's asking you, are friends a good test audience?
Our friends are good test audience. Oh, this is a very special group of friends chosen for their very fussiness, their very fussy and critical eye.
Okay. 𝗠𝗠𝗏𝗏, I was also wondering whether I could ask you about anecdotes from the filmmaking process of Invisible City that you might be able to share with us and just lift the curtain a little bit.
Apart from the one, the heart attack moment.
Sure.
During the edit. Yeah, I remember very what good anecdotes can I tell you? Let me pass on this one for now. When I can think of one, I will
when we come back to this a little bit later towards the end of the program, when we circle back to Invisible City. Maybe for the next half of the conversation, 𝗠𝗏𝗏, I'd love to talk about beginnings as well, and just talk about your filmmaking journey, maybe more broadly. How did you come into filmmaking, and in particular documentary filmmaking?
I started out as a lawyer, but in the middle of law school, I discovered the joys of still photography from books in the library, not even the university library, but the town library. And I kind of felt that, you know, a lightning bolt had struck me when I realized that I wanted to be a photographer. So I think I probably spend more time in the dark room than with my law books. Yeah.
Interesting.
When I came back to Singapore, I was doing a lot of photography. Another moment had struck me when I realized that, I wish these still images, which I love, could move and talk at the same time. Why can't they move? Why can't they talk? And I think these questions coincided with the development of the Sony VX100, which was one of the first prosumer cameras that could take very good quality video. So immediately what was up until then considered unattainable because of its cost, like film and film camera, suddenly was within touch, within reach for someone like me. And I just decided, okay, I'm going to move over to the other, from stills to moving images. And that was how it all started.
Right. Just latching on the part of your sharing when you talk about photography and being really inspired by the books in the university town's library. I think, if I'm not wrong, you also mentioned that you had been influenced by the work of photographers like Robert Frank, Gary Winogrand, Diane Arbus, and then after graduation, I believe you also traveled to China with your camera as well. How much of this exploration in photography transitioned into your filmmaking practice?
I would say 100%. I would still say that the way I make films is still very much like Robert Frank. You know, he's just traversing the country, and well, he was traversing the country, trying to take images of Americans at that time. Yeah. And I find myself doing the same still. You know, it's still very Lone Ranger, person with a camera. They call it street photography. I think it's quite an apt term to describe. Yeah. So I think it hasn't. My mode of making art hasn't changed all these years.
An obligatory question for us, 𝗠𝗏𝗏.
Sure.
Which films or filmmakers have influenced the way that you thought about or are still thinking about cinema as a mode of expression?
Wow.
And you can take all the time you want.
I have to say that the person that also another lightning thunderbolt moment was seeing 悲情城市 City of Sadness, 侯孝贤's film. And it coincided with the first time I saw Hokkien being spoken on a big screen. I thought, hey, is that even possible? Because I'd spent my whole life, just watching Cantonese from VHS tapes because they were illegal. Not illegal, that you couldn't hear dialects on the screen. But when I saw his very realistic portrayal of life, I just thought, wow, this is something I want to do as well. So that's one person I would definitely say.
悲情城市.
悲情城市 specifically, right?
Right.
Who else do I think? I really love the work of 𝗙𝗟𝗏 Perfumed Nightmare, Philippine director. It's just so whimsical and done with so much smarts, but with so little resources. So I feel that those are my two people that I hold as touchstones of what I want to do as well.
Right. And Pimpin, so many of your films, and I suppose your body of work, it's really about the topic of Singapore. And I wanted to take the time to ask you about this as well. What draws you to the subject that you have continued to approach and explore stories of Singapore, maybe the less kind of known narratives as well of our city in your body of work?
Sorry.
Don't worry about it. It happens. We're alive.
I think Singapore chose me. I didn't choose Singapore. I have no idea why. I've been making films with Singapore as its main theme for the past more than 25 years now. I think every feature film that I have made has Singapore as its main star. And even the short films as well. I think probably the only way to resolve this would be to leave Singapore. Then maybe I will make films not about Singapore.
Is this speculative or something that you have been thinking about?
No, I'm just trying to think. The question you asked, it made me think. So if being in Singapore brought out these films, then maybe moving away from it would pull me out of this topic.
Right. Something that I have come across when I was reading up about you is that you have a collection of newspaper clippings, I believe, that you have amassed across more than a decade, and that has at times served as source material for your work. Your documentary, The Impossibility of Knowing, as an instance. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that it's not just the documenting instinct, the Karang-Guni instinct as well. Yeah.
What are those clippings? I mean, what do they comprise of?
Well, it's in the film The Impossibility of Knowing, which you can watch for free at tanpimpin.com. I don't know, it's just like little details. For example, when you read a news article, there's a detail like, oh, they committed suicide, but both the lovers who committed suicide wore little red string around their ring finger. Then that little detail just kind of resonated with me. So for me, that was the reason to cut out that article. Yeah. I remember. So I would say it's a personal filter of my own subconscious that I can't even articulate to myself.
Right. So if I ask you whether you feel like there's something that resonates as a thread across all the clippings, it might be quite hard to pinpoint what exactly it is.
Yes. So it's a very, very personal eye of something quite tangential.
Right.
You know? And I feel that that's how films are made as well. Why so many artworks, maybe not just film, have a very distinctive perspective to it. It's because it's this filter that we have in our minds that picks out of everything that and that alone.
Pimpin, just now when you mentioned Singapore may or may not continue to feature as the subject of your films, depending on whether you might be here or whether you might not be here. Can I also ask you whether there are other sort of peripheral topics or themes that might be at the top or back of your mind that you could be interested in exploring?
Gosh, I have too many ideas. You just have to wait for the next film, which will come out next year.
Next year? Okay.
Yeah, next
all right.
Yeah.
Is that Hinterland by any chance?
No, not Hinterland. Hinterland was actually the old name for In Time to Come.
Ah, right. Okay. All right. I wanted to get a question from my colleague Jerome, and he would like to ask you about Invisible City. And his comment is that this film is really a treasure trove of amazing hidden stories. Jerome would like to ask you, have you ever thought of, if you are given enough sufficient resources, to revisit this film again as an extended cut? Were there stories that you perhaps wanted to include but didn't feel right at the point in time when the film was made?
Wow. I do feel that every film that I make is the same film, just expressed differently. So there is never a sense of going back to remake the film. It's just making the next film. Yeah. So, for example, the Invisible City was meant to be a film about Singapore spaces, but because I took a 180-degree turn into a film about people who document, the footage that I had filmed earlier part of the shoot then became Snow City, and then it also became In Time to Come. So rather than going backwards to kind of like fix things back in, everything it just keeps moving forward. That's how I see it.
Right. Well, maybe I would just use this as the opportunity to get more questions about Invisible City to you then. I read that you once commented that you felt at that point in time that Invisible City is the most seemingly intractable film that you've made. Do you still feel the same way about the work?
Now looking back, it was like really a piece of easy peasy. Yeah, but no, I feel that was when I said it then, that was maybe 10 years ago. At that time I hadn't made To Singapore with Love, and I hadn't made In Time to Come, and I also hadn't made Seven Letters yet. But it was difficult relative to Singapore Gaga, which kind of like fell into place really. Well, no, that's not true. It didn't fall into place. There were a lot of hard moments as well. It was difficult because I had to let go my original vision for the film.
Right.
I think every director doesn't want to let go their original vision, but then there's no choice because, as I mentioned, it made no sense to anyone else.
The test audience.
The test audience of very critical friends.
I also came across this really interesting observation that you shared about your own film, Singapore Gaga. You said that it's a bitter film actually, and you thought that Wasted Days and Wasted Nights was the perfect song to bracket it. But alongside that runs this strand of sense of hope, humor and celebration, and you felt that internal tensions and contradictions make a work strong. and that the text should be readable in many ways by as many people. And I thought that's a really lovely kind of piece that I just came across when I was reading up about you. But okay, so this is not a leading question, but I wanted to ask, which of your films did you most enjoy making?
Enjoy. I don't think I equate filmmaking as an enjoyable process. Maybe less the less painful experience. Yeah, I think it's asked. I think every film is enjoyable and painful in its own way.
Right.
I would put it tactfully like that to all my babies.
Okay. I mean, apologies for asking you to pick your favorite child, but we like to do that. It's also an obligatory question. Pippin, I would like to circle back to Invisible City again. The film is still going to screen, and we have 3 more screenings of it in our space. So I wanted to ask you, what do you hope will stay with viewers after they encounter this film?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you're screening it during the National Day month, because I do feel this film is about Singapore, and specifically, how do we become who we are? I mean, what are the constituents of knowledge that constitute our consciousness of being a Singaporean? And I think that's a really, really pertinent question to ask that this film raises. And to my mind, I try to have all my films ask that question as well in different ways. I mean, To Singapore with Love asks that question as well. It's a film about political exiles. Yeah, in time to come, I mean, basically people who have been excised from the country. Right? In Time to Come is a film about all our daily rituals that gird this urban city we live in, and the mosquito fogging, fire alarms. Singapore Gaga is about the soundscapes that we brush by every day. So Invisible City asks is slightly different from the other 3, because this one specifically asks about the knowledge that we have about Singapore today and how the knowledge came to be. Really through the efforts of conservators, people who archive, and people who continue to document, of course.
2 last questions before we close the program. Maybe one from us, and then we'll get 𝗏𝗏𝗍𝗏 TV's. Oh, we have 2 last questions. Okay, okay. Pimpin, 1 last question from us and 2 from the audience. I wanted to ask you about maybe horizons new and near. Is there a particular focus in your work at the moment that you can share with us, or any upcoming projects that you might be able to tell us about?
My next work is about walking. That's all I'm going to say.
Full stop. Okay. All right. Okay. So the 2 questions from the audience. So 𝗏𝗏𝗍𝗏 TV's question is, he or she apologizes if this had been addressed before, if it might be a slightly more sensitive question. But how does an aspiring filmmaker fund filmmaking in Singapore?
I think it's really good training to see if you can make films, or actually make any art, not just films, with as little resources as you can, by just focusing on the robustness of the idea rather than the quality of the camera, or I think a lot of people just get too overwhelmed by the tech side of it without realizing that the concept, the ideas are even more important. One thing I would say though, and I think despite what I just said, having a good tripod and having a good mic is critical. You don't really have to have too good a visual. Yeah, but having a good mic and a good tripod will save your neck many times over.
Okay. And then one last question from Sullen. He or she is asking, can we ever hope to see a feature-length fiction film from you? Actually, you have a short fiction film, yeah, Pin, 7 letters, included
That's
7
right.
letters, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. Feature length.
Maybe, but I'm really interested more in process than the final product, because most of my films, as I mentioned, were all organically made over a long period of time and then edited and born in the editing process. If there was a fiction process that allows me, a fiction film that allows me this kind of process, I would do it. Because for me, the whole idea of walking around with 30 crew behind you just doesn't seem to appeal to me as much.
Right.
Going back to the idea of, you using Robert Frank or Gary Winogrand as models, I'm kind of that way, leaning towards that way of making art.
Okay, Pin, thank you so much for making time to take part in today's live stream conversation. And also, thank you to all of you who have been spending your time with us in Pin this evening. We really appreciated the questions and the comments that have come our way on Facebook and YouTube. And if you are happy to share your feedback with us on today's program, please do that in an online questionnaire that will be coming through a QR code on your screen or in an online link in the chat. There are 3 more screenings of Invisible City, as we mentioned. It's happening on the coming Sundays of 21st August, 28th August, and 4th of September at 2 p.m. at Art Science Museum. We also hope you come by and see some of the other titles in the Imaging Paradise film program. There's Lizard on the Wall, 03 Flats, 667, Tiong Bahru Social Club, Old Places, Old Romances, and Old Friends. These are the works of a beautiful constellation of filmmakers such as 𝗂𝗏𝗟𝗠𝗠𝗠𝗂𝘠, He Xiuming, Jun Chong, Kirsten Tan, 𝗚𝗏𝗟𝗂𝗂, 𝗏𝗏𝗟𝗏, Royston Tan, Eva Tang, Victor Teng, 𝗙𝗵𝗏𝗱ᵉ, Alvin Lee, and of course, Tan Pin. As with any program that we present, there's a team looking after various aspects of the planning and production behind the scenes with a lot of care. So I would like to acknowledge my colleagues in public programs, Lyra Tan, who's the lead producer of this live stream engagement with Pin, and she's wonderfully supported by Rachel Wong. It's been a pleasure being your host for today's program. Pin, thank you so much again for coming into the fold of Imaging Paradise and this conversation. I can't say this enough, but on behalf of all of us at the museum who are so fond of your practice and work, thank you for trusting us with the presentation of Invisible City in our space. Please keep well, and we wish you and your team at the studio all the best for your upcoming projects.
Thank you very much, Sin. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and hi to everyone who might be watching out there.
Have a lovely weekend, everyone.
Yeah, bye-bye.